Welcome to another deep dive. Whether you're prepping for a briefing, maybe getting caught up on global security frameworks, or just intensely curious about the underlying mechanics of international relations,
Yeah.
we were really glad you're here with us.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because today's mission is to unpack a highly consequential and very timely geopolitical text. We're looking at a recent analysis by independent observer Dr. Iwan Ratman, and it's titled The Geopolitics of Nuclear Deterrence and Middle East Stability.
Right, and it's a profound piece of analysis. He focuses heavily on the structural imbalances in global military power and really how those imbalances directly feed into regional instability. Ratman is essentially attempting to map out the underlying architecture of modern conflict.
He is. But before we get into the actual mechanics of that architecture,
Yeah.
we do need to set some strict ground rules for you, the listener, because the source material we're covering today centers on a highly politically charged military conflict.
Very charged.
Yeah, the events in the Middle East from late February 2026. Given the gravity and the sensitivity of those events, we must be absolutely clear right up front. We are not taking sides today.
No, not at all. We are not endorsing the viewpoints of the author, nor are we taking any sort of political stance on the conflict itself.
Right.
Our sole objective for this deep dive is to impartially report, to synthesize, and just convey the theories and ideas exactly as they are presented in Dr. Ratman's original text. We're just examining his geopolitical arguments and the framework he uses to view global security.
Exactly. So keeping that completely objective lens firmly in place, let's look at the core theme of Ratman's text, because he tackles a question that sits at the very foundation of international relations, which is, why do certain states possess the recognized right to hold the ultimate weapon, while other sovereign nations face preemptive military action for even attempting to acquire one?
It's the defining paradox of global security, really. And Ratman argues that this isn't just some philosophical double standard. He says it's a structural flaw that makes the world inherently dangerous.
Right.
But to understand his perspective on that paradox, we have to look at the specific catalyst for his analysis.
Okay, let's unpack this. The inciting incident that's detailed in the text took place on February 28, 2026. The source outlines a major military operation where the United States and Israel launched extensive airstrikes targeting strategic facilities inside Iran.
And the text makes it very clear that the fallout from this operation was severe. Ratman notes that these airstrikes killed several high-ranking state officials. But most significantly,
The supreme leader.
yes, the strikes resulted in the death of Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, during an attack in Tehran.
And the text highlights that Israel characterized this military action as a preemptive strike, which was carried out with explicit U.S. support. And, I mean, when a sovereign nation's highest leadership is targeted in that manner, retaliation is practically guaranteed.
Right, it's inevitable.
So the source details Iran's immediate response, which was a massive barrage of missile and drone strikes targeting U.S. and allied military installations all across the Middle East.
What's fascinating here is how Ratman uses this extremely volatile sequence of events to illustrate a broader and honestly more terrifying point about the fragility of the international order.
How so?
Well, he points out how this rapid escalation going from a targeted airstrike to a massive regional retaliation in a matter of hours, it demonstrates how quickly direct confrontation between major military powers can trigger a sweeping regional crisis.
Or a global one.
Exactly.
The speed of the escalation is really what Ratman zeroes in on. It's a powder keg scenario. But his analysis doesn't just chronicle the events, right? He attempts to diagnose the underlying condition that made the region a powder keg in the first place.
Right.
And he traces that root cause back to global military and nuclear inequality.
He essentially argues that you just cannot analyze the events of February 2026 in a vacuum. You have to contextualize them within the broader framework of asymmetric vulnerability.
Meaning, who holds nuclear power and who doesn't.
Exactly. That dynamic dictates the rules of engagement.
So let's pull the statistics directly from the source to illustrate that asymmetry for you. There are an estimated 12,000 nuclear warheads in the world today. But out of nearly 200 countries, only 9 possess them.
Just 9.
Yeah. You have the major recognized powers: Russia, the United States, China, France, and the United Kingdom.
And then you have the states operating outside that original non-proliferation framework. So that's India, Pakistan, Israel, and North Korea.
Right. And within that already exclusive group of 9, there's another massive concentration of power: The text notes that Russia and the U.S. hold almost 90% of that entire global arsenal.
Yeah, that's a staggering statistic. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, when Ratman looks at those numbers, he applies the classical international relations theory of deterrence.
Okay, let's break that down.
In the context of the source, deterrence is the ability of a state to prevent an adversary from initiating an attack simply because the adversary knows the retaliatory cost would be unacceptably high.
It's the grim logic of mutually assured destruction.
Precisely.
It's basically like playing a high-stakes game where everyone is throwing punches, but only a few players are allowed to wear armor. It creates this permanent tier system of sovereignty.
That's a great way to put it.
If you lack a nuclear deterrent, you suffer from that asymmetric vulnerability we mentioned. Ratman argues that non-nuclear states are inherently and constantly exposed to the strategic whims of heavily armed powers.
And he backs that up with history.
He does. He pulls historical examples from the text to demonstrate that lacking a deterrent essentially acts as an open invitation for regime change or foreign military intervention.
That is the crucial through line in his historical comparisons. Because he brings up the 2003 U.S. invasion of Iraq, noting specifically that Iraq at that time did not possess nuclear weapons. And then he contrasts Iraq with the 2011 NATO military intervention in Libya.
And the Libya example is absolutely central to his argument, because the 2011 intervention happened explicitly after Muammar Gaddafi had agreed to halt and completely dismantle his weapons of mass destruction programs.
Ratman uses Libya as the ultimate cautionary tale for non-nuclear states. His analysis suggests that the implicit message sent to the global community in 2011 was incredibly clear. If a state gives up its pursuit of the ultimate deterrent, it loses its ultimate insurance policy against foreign intervention.
Because the threat is gone.
Exactly. The moment the threat of unacceptable retaliation is removed, stronger nations do not hesitate to use conventional military force to achieve strategic goals.
Which brings us to the inverse of that dynamic. Ratman points to the relationship between India and Pakistan to prove that deterrence, terrifying as it is, actually creates a strange kind of stability.
It really does. These are two states with a deeply fraught history, multiple fought wars, ongoing border disputes.
Very high tensions.
Always. However, the text highlights that both India and Pakistan have officially possessed nuclear weapons since 1998.
Right. And Ratman argues that while lower-level conflicts and border skirmishes have continued between them, a major, catastrophic, all-out war has been avoided for decades.
Because of the arsenals.
His conclusion is that the deterrence is functioning exactly as designed. The risk of total annihilation forces both governments to keep their conventional conflicts below the threshold of total war.
So Ratman takes this global theory of deterrence, this idea that strategic parity prevents total war, and he applies it directly to the Middle East's security dilemma. This is where his analysis tackles the February 2026 conflict directly.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The source notes that in the Middle East, there is a regional monopoly on nuclear power. Israel is widely understood to be the only nuclear-armed state in the region.
Yes.
The text states they are believed to possess around 90 nuclear warheads, despite maintaining a policy of nuclear ambiguity where they never officially acknowledge the arsenal.
Right. It's an unconfirmed but universally recognized reality. And on the other side of that equation, you have states like Iran, which, according to the text, have no officially recognized military nuclear capability.
So it's completely one-sided.
Exactly. And Ratman argues that this massive discrepancy in strategic capability creates a profound perception of injustice and fundamentally destabilizes the entire region.
Because it violates the very concept of strategic parity we just talked about with India and Pakistan.
Yeah.
If one nation has absolute sovereign impunity and its neighbors have none, geopolitical tensions are structurally guaranteed to remain high.
Which leads right back to the events we started with.
Right. Ratman argues this exact imbalance is the bedrock of the February 2026 conflict.
But he doesn't just diagnose this imbalance, he presents a framework for resolving it. Ratman outlines 3 strategic recommendations for fixing regional instability, and they are quite radical when you consider current international policy.
Very radical. His first recommendation tackles the nuclear monopoly directly. He argues for the creation of what he calls strategic balance in the Middle East. And he offers 2 mutually exclusive paths to get there.
The first path being total disarmament.
Right. The disarmament of Israel's nuclear arsenal to create a genuinely nuclear weapons-free Middle East.
Which is a monumental diplomatic undertaking given the deep security concerns of the region. But it is his alternative path that really pushes the boundaries of conventional geopolitical thought.
The proliferation path.
Yes, Ratman argues that if total regional disarmament is impossible, the only other way to achieve strategic balance is to grant other nations in the region explicitly, including Iran, the equal right to build their own deterrence capability.
Ratman is essentially arguing that mutually assured destruction is actually safer than unilateral dominance.
That's his core thesis.
He is suggesting that controlled nuclear proliferation might actually be a stabilizing force for the Middle East, basically replicating the Cold War logic that kept the US and the Soviets from directly destroying each other.
Or the dynamic keeping India and Pakistan in check, as he pointed out earlier. It is a highly controversial stance, definitely. But it is entirely logically consistent with his strict adherence to deterrence theory.
In his view, a region must have either zero nuclear weapons or an equitable distribution of them.
Exactly. Anything in between simply perpetuates a cycle of unilateral aggression where the dominant power can strike without any fear of existential reprisal.
That concept of unilateral aggression leads perfectly into his second recommendation, which addresses the role of global superpowers operating in the region. Ratman argues that the immense military footprint of the United States in the Middle East acts as a destabilizing force if it remains unchecked.
So to counter that unipolarity, he suggests a multipolar balancing mechanism. Ratman writes that achieving genuine regional security requires the active involvement of other global powers, and he specifically names Russia and China here.
The theoretical framework being that multiple superpowers checking each other's influence will prevent any single nation from launching or supporting unilateral conflicts.
It is a call for a return to a classic balance of power rather than a unipolar hegemony. If the U.S. backs one regional actor, Russia and China must be present to back others, which theoretically raises the diplomatic and military cost of any preemptive strikes.
And his third recommendation shifts from military balancing to diplomatic architecture. He focuses heavily on strengthening international law.
Right.
Ratman insists the international community must ensure that military force against sovereign nations is never utilized unilaterally without absolute global legitimacy.
He is targeting the very concept of the preemptive strike that Israel and the U.S. utilized in February 2026. Ratman is calling for a system where bypassing international consensus carries severe, enforceable penalties.
So when you look at these three recommendations, total disarmament or equal proliferation, multipolar superpower balancing, and strict enforcement of international law, you see a cohesive vision for a completely restructured global order.
You really do.
But the obvious question for you to listen is, how does the world actually get there?
And Ratman doesn't leave that question hanging. He brings this massive systemic analysis down to a very specific national lens. He focuses on the geopolitical utility of the middle power, and he specifically zeroes in on the role of Indonesia.
So what does this all mean for Indonesia specifically?
This is a vital pivot in the text. Ratman transitions from diagnosing the flaws in the Middle East to assigning a diplomatic mandate to his own region. He views middle powers as the necessary counterweight to the superpowers that are driving these conflicts.
The text lays out some key characteristics that define Indonesia's unique position on the global stage. It is the largest democracy in Southeast Asia, and critically, it is the largest Muslim-majority country in the world.
Ratman argues those two factors combined grant Indonesia a powerful moral and diplomatic authority, particularly regarding conflicts involving the Islamic world. They have the demographic weight and the democratic legitimacy to be heard in international forums.
But the author goes beyond just demographic influence. He grounds this diplomatic duty in Indonesia's foundational legal documents. The text explicitly notes that the Indonesian constitution mandates the state to actively participate in the establishment of a world order based on freedom, perpetual peace, and social justice.
It is a constitutional imperative. Ratman leverages that legal framing to argue that the Indonesian government is fundamentally obligated to push back against systemic global imbalances.
They can't just be passive observers to conflicts in the Middle East.
Right. But this raises an important question. How does a non-nuclear middle power democracy actually constrain heavily armed superpowers and nuclear-armed regional actors?
Ratman's answer is relentless multilateral diplomacy.
Yes. He urges Indonesia to utilize its unique position to advocate for the structural solutions we just discussed, like regional balancing and the strict adherence to international law.
And the arenas for this advocacy, according to the source, are massive global forums like the United Nations and the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, the OIC.
He views these multilateral organizations as the only viable mechanism for non-nuclear states to exert any real pressure. Because if a single middle power complains about unilateral aggression, it is easily ignored by a superpower.
Exactly.
But if a state like Indonesia can build a unified coalition within the UN or the OIC, they can begin to construct a diplomatic firewall against unchecked military action.
It is a fascinating perspective on the responsibility of states operating outside the immediate blast radius of a conflict.
Hmm.
Ratman is basically arguing that the stability of the global system relies on middle powers refusing to accept the asymmetric vulnerability dictated by the nuclear states.
Synthesizing everything we have covered from Dr. Ratman's text today, we see a highly structured argument about the nature of power itself. He uses the devastating airstrikes and the massive retaliations of February 2026, not just as historical events, but as a magnifying glass.
He connects the violence of those specific events directly to the deeply dangerous realities of global nuclear inequality.
And his ultimate conclusion is that as long as the international security architecture allows a handful of nations to operate with sovereign impunity while leaving everyone else vulnerable, the potential for catastrophic, rapid escalation will always be present.
For Ratman, the path to perpetual peace requires a desperate push for strategic balance, either through the total elimination of these weapons or the equal distribution of their deterrent power.
Exactly.
As we wrap up this analysis, I want to reiterate the ground rules we established at the beginning of the show. This deep dive was designed as an objective exploration of Dr. Ratman's geopolitical framework.
Yes, strictly objective.
Our goal was to help you understand the highly complex, systemic arguments he makes regarding the Middle East security dilemma and deterrence theory. We explored these concepts exactly as he wrote them, without taking a political stance or endorsing a viewpoint on the incredibly sensitive events of February 2026.
We hope this breakdown has provided you with a clearer understanding of the structural arguments surrounding nuclear proliferation and regional stability. But before we finish, there is a fascinating nuance in the source material that deserves further consideration.
Oh, absolutely.
It is something for you to mull over as you process Ratman's theories.
The floor is yours.
We have spent a significant amount of time today dissecting Ratman's focus on the ultimate deterrent, which is the nuclear warhead. But the source material also specifically documented Iran's use of drone strikes in their massive retaliation against U.S. and allied bases.
Right, the missile and drone barrage.
Think about the implications of that technology in the context of everything we just discussed. Traditional deterrence relies on the massive state-sponsored terror of a multi-billion-dollar nuclear program. Only a few states can afford that ticket to sovereign impunity.
Right, the exclusivity of the nuclear club is the whole problem Ratman is pointing out.
Exactly. So how does the rapid rise of cheap, highly accessible, non-nuclear asymmetric warfare, like devastating drone swarms, disrupt that traditional balance of power? If virtually any nation, regardless of their nuclear status or their economic output, can launch a precise, overwhelming drone strike that cripples a superior military's infrastructure, does the old nuclear playbook even apply anymore?
That's a great question.
Is the multi-billion-dollar warhead losing its strategic value to a million-dollar drone swarm?
That completely reframes the concept of asymmetric vulnerability. If conventional, relatively cheap technology can bypass the nuclear deterrent entirely, the tier system of sovereignty Ratman describes might actually be fracturing in real time.
It's a profound shift.
That is absolutely something for you to critically examine as you read the news and watch these geopolitical dynamics unfold. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We highly encourage you to keep questioning the underlying structures of the world around you, and we will catch you on the next one.